G'day everyone. Today we're talking about Pope Brian and the gospel of being silenced, the most persecuted man in New Zealand. New Zealand has produced some genuine underdogs over the years, people who were actually shut out, actually mocked, actually denied opportunity. And then we have another category entirely, the public figure who is silenced in the same way a foghorn is silenced when it echoes across the harbour. This is the person who can be loud, relentless, confrontational, and constantly in the media cycle and still present themselves as a brave minority voice that isn't allowed to speak. It's a fascinating trick. It turns attention into evidence of oppression and criticism into proof of righteousness. Paperwork as persecution. The hook for this article is reporting about a destiny-linked entity in liquidation with significant amounts reported owed and a comically small amount of cash on hand. Now, any sane adult reads that and asks predictable questions. What is the entity? What was it for? Who controls it? How did it end up here? Who's left holding the debt? But in the grievance economy, those questions are too grounded, too earthy, too practical. The far better story is that the true enemy is not financial reality, but the machinery of accountability itself. Courts, tax, the IRD, reporting, inquiries, everything that forces you to explain yourself. If you can reframe that as tech, you never have to address the substance. You just have to fight the vibes. The genius of the martyr narrative. Here's why the martyr narrative is so effective. It does three things at once. First, it turns scrutiny into persecution. If anyone asks questions, they're not doing their job, they're out to get you. Second, it turns disagreement into trauma. If people don't like what you say, that's not pluralism, it's silencing. Third, it turns the leader into a brand. And when the leader is the brand, any criticism of behavior can be sold as hatred of the entire entity. That's why some leaders can punch down repeatedly and still claim they're the wounded party. The framework is built to make them untouchable. Bigotry dressed up as courage. A lot of this falls apart when you name the real dynamic. Some public religious movements thrive on certainty, judgment, and division. They don't just hold beliefs, they monetize the conflict around those beliefs. That conflict often has a familiar target list: queer people, other religions, the woke, the liberals, media, the state, anyone who won't submit. Now, satire is useful here because it exposes the ridiculousness of the claim that a movement with access to attention, money, organization, and consistent media oxygen is somehow the weak and voiceless victim. No one is stopping them speaking. People are simply refusing to clap. The conspiracy temptation. And then we get to the fun part, because if you really want to avoid accountability, you don't just say, they're attacking us, you add a conspiracy. Not the boring kind of evidence, not the kind that stands up in daylight, the cinematic kind, a glittering coalition of enemies who all somehow share the same objective: to silence the man who cannot stop being heard. You can mix and match shadowy elites, foreign influence, the media as a single creature, activists as an organized cabal, faceless bureaucrats as villains, global puppet masters as plot devices. The purpose isn't truth, the purpose is insulation. If your followers believe you're under siege, then any critique becomes enemy action. Any investigation becomes persecution. Any debt becomes injustice. The moral inversion at the centre. This is the part that should concern New Zealand, even if you find the whole thing ridiculous. The deeper issue is moral inversion. A movement that thrives on judgment can still claim it's the victim. A leader who punches down can still claim they're being attacked. A public figure who receives huge attention can still claim they're being silenced. And a structure under scrutiny can still claim the problem is not the facts, but the people asking about the facts. That inversion is corrosive. It trains people to treat accountability as violence and consequences as oppression. In a healthy civic culture, it's the opposite. Accountability is part of trust. Scrutiny is part of legitimacy. Questions are part of public life. what a mature response looks like. If you run anything significant, whether it's a church, a charity, or a business, there's a grown-up way to handle pressure. You don't start with, "We're being attacked." You start with, "Here are the facts, here is the structure, here is what happened, here's what we're doing about it, here's how we'll prevent it happening again." That's what real leadership looks like, not endless grievance, not theatrical persecution, not blaming outsiders for consequences. So, a closing thought. So yes, let's offer the deeply sarcastic salute. Despite being so terribly, so biblically, so theatrically victimized, Pope Brian continues to endure like a martyr, like a candle in the wind, like a talkback caller who mistakes the producer's warning for proof of censorship. And the punchline is the same every time. The silencing never arrives. The voice remains. The outrage continues. The venom keeps flowing, seemingly unchecked, much to the exhaustion of a country that would like a little less holy tantrum and a little more accountability. If you want the full article, the link is in the description. And if you'd like to discuss this, my contact details are there too. And if you want more straight talking on leadership, governance, and the real world mechanics of trust, stick around, maybe even subscribe. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.